The Curse of Osiris is Bungie's first released expansion for their recent release title, Destiny 2. The expansion comes with both new story and multiplayer content, a new mini-raid, and a new player space for $20. At a glance, $20 for all of these things seems like a fair price, but after playing the new content, aside from the mini-raid at the time of recording this, the Curse of Osiris barely feels like it gives enough to justify its asking price. How so? Well, I'll explain with my ending thoughts on the Curse of Osiris. With the launch of Destiny 2 back in September, many people had mixed opinions. Personally, I rather enjoyed the new gunplay, though I'll admit it doesn't quite stand as great mechanically as Destiny 1. Enemies feel too swarmy, and it seems that the third ability given to players, such as the Healing Rift for Warlocks, is only really there to cover the faster combat and help you against the sheer amount of enemies who stand in one place while you shoot them, or the hordes charging you non-stop. But that's for a separate look at the base game. After enjoying the overly bombastic story of Destiny 2, I was actually quite excited to see what new adventure our Guardian would be set on, as we were introduced to the character Osiris. Osiris is one of Destiny's most intriguing characters as far as Destiny's lore goes, and I thought to myself of all the strange possibilities of where the story could go as we fought to help this supposed legendary Guardian. Unfortunately, the story wound up encompassing exactly how I feel about this entire DLC. Small, short, and overly safe. The story was about 2.5 to 3 hours long, which is fine as Destiny has more to do than just its story, but the new playspace on Mercury is the tiniest playspace in the game. It feels like a slightly bigger PvP map rather than an interesting new world with a lot of thought put into it. With no real amount of collectible items, lost sectors, and no depth or verticality that the other maps managed to accomplish. It feels like this player space is incomplete. The DLC does come with an extra area called the Infinite Forest. This is an area where a player progresses from one location to another by going through a number of semi-randomly generated platforms with enemies, and the only way to progress from platform to platform is to reach the end door of said platform. The problem with these is you absolutely do not have to do anything to reach these doors except run. There are a few platforms that require you to kill an enemy to progress, but there are so few of them, at least in my playthrough, that it just becomes a nuisance and seems to really only be there to halt your progress momentarily. It's true that you can choose to run past these enemies and get done faster. However, when I start to get bored repeating the same thing over and over, then of course I'm going to want to get done with it sooner. And unfortunately, most of your time will be spent in the Infinite Forest. That's not to say that it isn't captivating at first. The visuals of Mercury and the Infinite Forest, along with a few other locations, are absolutely stunning, but it isn't looks alone that can hold the player's attention. The story itself ends on a pretty bland note. Osiris leaves, making his appearance almost pointless at all, as he's only in the first and final cutscenes of the story. I appreciate what Bungie tried here with the final boss of the story, but it just wasn't enough to leave me going, "Wow, that was great." Instead, I finished the story and said, well, okay. Bungie wanted this DLC to bring more endgame content to Destiny 2. A worthy goal, as Destiny 2 does seem to be lacking endgame content compared to Destiny 1. Now, people could argue that Destiny 1 has more because it's been out longer, and yes, you're right. But the point of a sequel is to build upon already established material of the first game, and I'm afraid that Curse of Osiris just doesn't quite seem to help with adding new content to satisfy player needs to constantly return to the game. That's one thing I was hoping the Curse of Osiris would bring back to Destiny, more things to strive for in the endgame. And while there are some new additions, a lot of it is also locked behind the Eververse loot box system, and feels like the DLC is leaning more heavily towards players paying for badass new gear. The Curse of Osiris also sees the return of heroic strikes to the game, but this almost feels like a slap in the face for Destiny fans due to the fact that heroic strikes were in the first game. For Bungie to seemingly lock off this section of content that we've had since the first game honestly feels kind of like they're ripping us off here, offering, quote, new things in Destiny 2, end quote, only to realize that these were things we've had in Destiny 1 all along. And the fact that Bungie charged for this feature feels crappy, and in my opinion should have been added in a free update. I'm not going to talk about the problem when content that players couldn't access because it was suddenly locked off for them if they didn't buy the DLC, as that seems to be being addressed and fixed currently. All in all, Curse of Osiris is a giant bland disappointment. It plays things very safe and doesn't add any major new changes, making it feel like, once again, we have had content that's been stripped out of the base game and sold separately, especially with the paid edition of Heroic Strikes. So you're really paying for a 2 to 3 hour story and a new mini-raid. If this is enough to justify $20 from you, then that's fine, so be it. It just wasn't enough for me personally. Ultimately, my ending thoughts with this DLC is disappointment round the board. And again, I'm pretty much done with Destiny 2. I will see what the final expansion has to offer, but unfortunately my hopes are not that high any further for the advancement of the Destiny franchise. If you're still around, then thank you for watching my ending thoughts of the Curse of Osiris.